Hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of Israel Explained. Today, we're going to be talking about a discussion that I've been hearing a lot lately about whether or not Israel is losing more soldiers because it has made a guarantee to the United States that it will take more precautions in order to prevent the loss of civilian Palestinian life. There's been talk about this for a few days now since the renewal of the fighting after the ceasefire. But last night, there were 9 Israeli soldiers killed in a particularly tragic incident in Shuja'iyya, where soldiers ran into IEDs, were separated from the main force, had to be rescued. The rescue force also got caught in crossfire, had faced further IEDs. The whole incident is being investigated as we speak, and you know, hopefully the military will be learning from it. But we're not going to look deeply into that incident. Rather, we're going to look on the more macro level at whether Israel has changed its procedures and if due to American demands, and whether that change in procedures is leading to the loss of life of Israelis. Because we're hearing a lot of calls saying Israel should be completely destroying buildings from the air, shouldn't be sending in forces, that it's putting soldiers at risk needlessly, etc. So we're going to see if the reality links up with with that narrative. And this has been a very tragic incident, and hopefully we won't have as many soldiers killed in one incident, but there's definitely going to be more. So this issue is gonna keep coming up. So the question is here, if Israel had used more firepower to begin with, would it have been able to prevent the tragic death of all these soldiers? I've been talking to some military sources, and I've been reading a lot of interpretation by Israeli military figures, watching interviews, and the answer to this seems to generally be no. And I'll explain why. What everyone stresses in the military is the importance of boots on the ground. There's never really been a campaign won simply from the air. The air softens up targets, but ultimately, the enemy can often ride out bombings until the ground troops come in. And that's doubly true when there's a network of tunnels, like there is in Gaza, which historically has only really been seen one time before in Vietnam. And the Americans in Vietnam faced a very similar problem. So you can put a massive amount of firepower onto a spot before you attack it, and Israel has been doing that and should keep doing that. But unfortunately, there's a lot of targets that can't be destroyed in this manner, especially tunnels and tunnel shafts. Um, One of the main problems being that Israel doesn't have the location of every shaft and doesn't have the location of a lot of the weaknesses of tunnels. So very often it's pounding tunnels repeatedly and they're not coming down. So once the ground forces come in to try to purify the area of enemy forces, the amount of fire and support has to go down so that there's no risk of friendly fire. Even with that, there's risk of friendly fire. The more intense the IDF's bombings are, the more likely that becomes. And according to IDF numbers, about 15% of the casualties that Israel has taken in Gaza are, unfortunately, from friendly fire. And that's something else we need to take into account. The guidance that the United States has given Israel to take extra precautions regarding civilian life were actually regarding the southern part of the Gaza Strip, not the northern part. And there's a reason for that. The northern part is basically bereft of civilians at this point. There are very few people trying to tough it out there who are not involved in Hamas, which is why a lot of those pictures of people surrendering when some say that they're not Hamas, that's ridiculous, right? These are terrorists. So the directives are about the South more than they're about the North. And that was made very clear when um, Blinken, the Secretary of State, visited Israel and talked with the Israeli cabinet. And the incident that occurred in Shuja'iyya is, of course, located on the eastern side of Gaza City, which means that it's firmly in the north. So those directives actually don't apply to the north in the same way because there aren't civilians there. So it's really all not that um, related, to be honest. Um, I saw an interview with former Golani commander Avi Peled, and Golani, of course, is the force that took the brunt of that terrible attack. And he said he doesn't believe there's not enough firepower being used because ultimately you can't find tunnel shafts from the air. And that's a direct quote. Peled also said something in this. He said, um, right now there's a somewhat rushed, or I should say, focused operation to go house to house in the main areas of Hamas control. So Jabalia, Sujawiya, and Central Khan Yunis. While perhaps some more care could be taken with that, one of the main reasons for that is because Israel is trying to put pressure on Hamas to make these surrenders more common, to make the unraveling of the Hamas chain of command occur quicker, and also to put pressure on Hamas to release hostages. Because what worked last time was that Hamas felt desperate enough to call for a ceasefire. Right now, there's a major argument within Hamas between um, basically it sounds like Yehia Sinwar and everyone else. Sinwar wants to keep going. Everyone else wants a ceasefire. The hope is that with a focused attack, going house to house using land troops, that um, debate inside Hamas will be settled in favor of a ceasefire, and that's considered to be by the Israeli government one of its main goals. And of course, there is a certain amount of pressure from the United States that's relevant to this, but not necessarily when they said that civilians should not be killed, but rather that there's a certain amount of time that Israel has in order to complete the operation. But as we discussed in previous episodes, Israel has to complete this operation in a certain amount of time just to keep its economy going. It doesn't have a endless time horizon, regardless of the United States. So a lot of the rush that it's feeling isn't really about that directive. And you can't bomb endlessly without creating pressure on the ground if you want to achieve some political points. Now, having said that, there are people in the IDF who believe that Israel's move right now should be to completely flatten, destroy, and never allow certain areas in the Gaza Strip to be reoccupied, especially hornets' nests of terrorism. I saw one commander say that Shuja'iyya should be turned into a parking lot, as in every building should be leveled with D9, uh, and Israel should make sure that no one ever returns there. That's for two reasons. One, Shuja'iyya has become a symbol of resistance against Israel in the Middle East. Symbols are very important. It's something that we'll probably talk a lot about in this channel. And turning a center of resistance into a place where no one can ever live, like salting the earth, the way the Romans did with Carthage, essentially, is the idea here. Primitive, but effective, might make other neighborhoods think carefully about resisting as hard and becoming a center of terrorist activity to the extent that Sujawiya has become. That is a different story. It's not clear if without American pressure, this is something that Israel would do. This is not a tactic that Israel has taken before. So it would be a new approach from them. I don't know if the United States has anything to do with that, but I am hearing plenty of people in the IDF saying things like that. We have to keep in mind, even if Sujawiya is flattened and turned into a parking lot, there's a limit to how many places Israel can do that in Gaza. That's not a realistic solution for most places, even if you think that that neighborhood should be subjected to that kind of solution. So, in final analysis, there's no question that the American directive to spare civilians has had some effect on Israeli fighting, but mostly in the South. In the South, right now, there really isn't the same kind of absolute destruction of buildings that we're seeing in the north. However, that doesn't seem to be causing more casualties in the south. Right now, the massive casualties are actually in the north, where Israel has employed a massive amount of destruction. So I'd say that even if similar incidents occur in the south, it's not necessarily because Israel isn't using enough firepower and destroying enough buildings, because Israel has destroyed or at least seriously damaged the vast majority of buildings in the north. So I don't necessarily think that more firepower here is the answer. The IDF is looking right now at better use of robotics, better use of dogs, better precautions against IEDs. It will learn lessons from it, but I think blaming the American directives for this is premature. And Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, has said that while Israel has taken some precautions, he doesn't see that much of a change in the way that it's acted. Certainly not as much as he would like. So I think this point is being belabored. However, we'll keep an eye on what Israel does now, whether it changes, and whether the United States is having more influence on the way the war is done. It's good to keep in mind that Israel has ignored a lot of American directives, especially when it comes to the combat, and in return has given a lot of humanitarian aid. And I think that's a good trade-off that Israel should continue to do what it needs to do to win, but also bring in humanitarian aid to keep the Americans off our backs, and because it's the right thing to do to help the civilian population in Gaza. And it certainly won't help Israeli soldiers if there's like an outbreak of plague that will affect the soldiers as well. Okay, so I have one question today from friend of the show, Fred, who's also a fellow Mets fan. Fred gave a long explanation of how he sees the conflict, which I enjoyed, but have cut out for the purposes of this video. But he does have a question at the end of his explanation. So he asks, is anyone in the Palestinian leadership really serious about peace? At what point do the Palestinian citizens decide they are tired of dying to support a bunch of cynical billionaires named Abbas, Hania, and Mashin? If the Palestinians cannot answer this question, then there is no point in pressuring Israel to make a two-state solution that won't be accepted and will only lead to more war and bloodshed. Yeah, well, this is a very difficult question. Is anyone in the Palestinian leadership really serious about peace? No. There are two very, as you said, cynical factions here, or you could almost say three very cynical factions, because Hamas is increasingly turning into two different camps. Um, you have the Sinwar camp that is bloodthirsty, psychopathic, wants to destroy Israel ASAP. You have the Qatar group, which is more, I would say, looking at the long-term political influence of Hamas and sees military force as a important tool in that. And then you have Fatah, which is trying desperately to survive and keep the money that it gets from aid when it's becoming very unpopular. And it does a lot of that by trying to look as hawkish as terror supporting to put a less of a positive frame on it than Hamas. So no, there is no one there who currently wants peace. That's why all plans call for the PA to be reformed. They call for changes from the bottom up involving education and civil society. And if there's not going to be serious reform in the PA, there's nothing to talk about. Israel really shouldn't allow any form of PA governance in Gaza. The current administration has proved unable to govern the West Bank, and they will be equally unable to rule Gaza. So you ask, at what point do Palestinian citizens decide they're tired of dying to support a bunch of cynical billionaires? Well, maybe never, but Israel needs to try. And the way that it tries is, as I said before, two-pronged strategy. Humiliate Hamas on the battlefield, defeat Hamas on the battlefield ruthlessly, create a better vision of tomorrow for Palestinian civilians. Carrot and a stick. You can't just focus on the carrot and you can't just focus on the stick. Both need to be done with a lot of determination. Um, but yeah, until that happens, pressuring Israel isn't really the main point. Pressuring the Palestinians and trying to reform the Palestinians is. And I have to say, the Biden administration is actually quite aware of that. But they understand that Israel has to be supportive of a move to change Palestinian society and be willing to take the risks and make the sacrifices to do that. And that's why they're pressuring Israel. But I don't think that the Biden administration has any illusions regarding the PA, and that's why they want to reform them. Okay, so that's the video for today. Please leave any questions that you have, and I'll answer them tomorrow. And remember to subscribe to the channel, people.